Hey creeps, it's Horror Free For All. Continuing my passion project I affectionately call Hall of Creeps, a series where I look at full-length feature movies that in my opinion resemble what would be segments or episodes in my favorite horror anthology franchise of all time, Creepshow. This film came out in 2021 as a part of the Welcome to Blumhouse line of straight-to-Amazon movies. It was written by Gigi Saul Guerrero, Perry Blackshear, and Shane McKenzie, and it was also directed by Gigi Saul Guerrero. And the film in question is Bingo Hell. Now, I'm going to be upfront and honest. I never heard a lick of anything about this movie, and it was only brought to my attention as of recent when I found a certain random person on Letterboxd's playlist of movies that, in their opinion, reminded them of anthology horror. And I saw that this movie was on that list. So I clicked on it, looked at the synopsis, looked at who's in the movie, and I was like, I'm going to check this movie out. And I'm sure glad I did. What's most upsetting to me is that movies like this that go straight to streaming don't have an official physical release. But after watching this, I noticed that on the black market on the internet, there are some bootlegs of this film that I might entertain buying for my physical collection, because this movie really does feel like a Creepshow segment. The way it's filmed, the way it's orchestrated, hell, even the way the story unravels feels like something that Creepshow would try to produce, especially in the new modern Shudder/AMC Plus television series. Another thing that I really appreciate about this movie is that it takes such a silly, schlocky premise, but in the typical Creepshow fashion, tries to have some subtext and commentary presented within the material, and never dives too deep into it, but presents it in a way to make you think and provocate the mind, which is the main reason why I've always loved Creepshow, is that it takes some schlock horror and it tries to blend actual substance in the mix. And what you get, in my opinion, is a recipe of greatness. Now, you might be curious, what is Bingo Hell about? The main characters in this horror romp are actually elderly folks. And the main character is played by Adriana Barraza, who plays a character known as Lupita. And Lupita is a very hardened woman who lives in the community that she lives in. Unfortunately, her community is a bit run down and a bit hanging on in the past in terms of the people that reside in its mentality, and also for the fact that over time and over the years, the neighborhood they live in has fallen by the wayside, fallen into poverty a bit, gangs, drugs, money problems, you name it, run amok in the community. And as of recent, it's becoming gentrified. And if you don't know what gentrification is, it's essentially people coming from the outside, buying up property within underdeveloped neighborhoods, or I guess rundown neighborhoods like Lupita's neighborhood here. And through that, they're able to renovate buildings and bring in people with more moderate to higher incomes, which essentially run people out of where they've lived pretty much their whole lives. And with that comes problems. And Lupita notices that there's hipsters and, all these new coffee shops and businesses that don't belong in her community just popping up left and right each and every day. And she's growing tired of it. And the straw that breaks the camel's back in the story literally starts off the whole movie, where the local bingo hall owner of the town is seen coming home to his place of living, I guess, with a briefcase full of cash. And to celebrate, he decides to open up a tin on his kitchen table to stuff his face full of food. But in a graphic fashion, we see that he succumbs to some sort of paranormal fate. And before we know what that is, we have to get through a little bit more of the story. So as the story goes along, Lupita introduces us to a cavalcade of characters that we'll come to know in the movie. There's an auto shop dealer. There's a guy who I think is like a recovering alcoholic. You have a woman who lives with her mom, who happens to be Lupita's best friend, and she also has a teenage son who goes throughout the movie, being tempted by, gang life, drugs, and what have you. But Lupita tells them all that they should feel proud that the community that they've lived in their whole lives is still intact, and they have to keep fighting all this new things popping up in the neighborhood. And they know that the bingo hall has been put up for sale, but they don't know who's bought it yet. And very soon after this realization hits that the bingo hall owner is actually missing, they decide to go investigate where the bingo hall is, and they notice that pretty much overnight, a brand new bingo hall is going to be in the place of the old. And when they wander inside on the grand opening day, we see that there's this character named Mr. Big, who's played by the very underrated and massively talented Richard Brake, who is an over-the-top, eccentric bingo hall owner and host, who promises this community big wins and wins that will pretty much produce life-changing money. And Lupita immediately notices that something is very wrong. And she thinks that this bingo hall perhaps is linked to the evil, perhaps with gentrification that's been going on already, and perhaps with instilling poor morals and values into this community of people that she surrounds herself with, because deep down she knows that this bingo hall is not going to be any good for anyone. And as the story goes along, Lupita goes on a self-serving prophecy of sorts, where all of her friends decide to kind of shove her aside and think that maybe she's being too harsh and maybe she's not being as accepting as she should be. And she uncovers the truth of what happened to the bingo hall owner that owned the business beforehand, and perhaps a mysterious death that has gone unexplained. But unfortunately for her as well, all these characters that we've gotten introduced to because of her start interacting with this Mr. Big character in the bingo hall. And we see, slowly but surely, he's starting to pick victims to win his prizes of sorts, which he gives out in stacks of cash and briefcases too. And there's also this stamp that he carries around where if you give in to wanting to play his game, he'll stamp your hand. But we notice that the stamp perhaps bonds to the skin and might be doing something to the body, let's just say. And we see off the bat, like, a woman who had gotten a stamp, who happens to be the teenage boy's mom, wins $10,000, and she decides to up and leave her family and try to start a new life and go on a shopping spree. But unbeknownst to her, maybe this character, Mr. Big, might not be all the way human. It might be pulling some puppet strings behind the scenes and showing her things that aren't really real. And other examples come along in the movie as there's an older gentleman who owns a automobile shop who hits a bigger hit, I think of like $100,000, and he's working on his dream car inside of his shop, and he thinks that he's drinking, a beer and having fun working on the engine, but let's just say that isn't all the way it appears either. And it seems like that build up this suspense with this Mr. Big character, and that perhaps he's feeding on the people of the town wanting money and wanting to get out of it, and feeding on their life energy in maybe some demonic type of way. And as the story goes along, Lupita notices that her best friend, who's been going through some hardships because of her daughter walking out on her own son, and we also see that the son is going through his own hardships as he's looking to breaking into cars, and he meets this other gentleman who tries to tell him, hey, I was once in your shoes and what have you. And we see some drama unfold with that. And Lupita and her best friend have a falling out. So Lupita seems to be having her own visions involving this Mr. Big character, and perhaps she's being stalked in some weird lighting going on in her house, in her friend's house, and plagued by these flyers that just continuously pop up the more and more and more people keep going to this bingo hall and getting stamped to play this never-ending game. Well, it builds up to a point, I guess the climax of the movie here, where Lupita realizes that all of her friends, and basically everybody in town, whoever's left at least, are playing the game of bingo. And it's down to her, this gentleman who's befriended the teenage kid in the movie that I brought up, and the teenage kid himself. And them three take it upon themselves to go to the bingo hall one fateful evening to put a stop to this Mr. Big character and get him out of their neighborhood and save everybody from his evil tyranny. But some schlock ensues from there, and some over-the-topness happens in some pretty gory and brutal ways, let's just say. And this boils down to near the end of the movie, where Lupita has to pretty much face off, along with all the other people of her town, against Mr. Big. And we find out who wins in the story there. So I'm going to say this up front about Bingo Hell. This was a short and sweet movie. It was right underneath an hour and a half, I believe, and it really did fly by. This movie's heavily character focused, and I think a lot of people out there will tell you that have seen this movie, if you're not into the characters, you're not going to be into this movie. And I can totally buy that argument, and I'm going to echo it here as well. If you're not into Lupita and her ragtag group of friends that we see in and out of the movie, you're probably going to give two fucks about the plot. Which, to be fair, is probably this film's biggest weakness. But in the core of it, it's a very straightforward and simple story. It's a story about a woman trying to hold and preserve a tight-knit community that has held together despite countless of hardships, and they've been through a lot of pain and anguish together over the years. And the film comes to commentate in that EC Comics creepshow type of way about a really hard-hitting issue, gentrification in this case, without ever exploring it too deep. I love it when movies try to present, difficult topics to talk about in media without actually having to go into depth about it. And this movie, I think, does it pretty poignantly. Just introducing the idea of gentrification and the effects on a community, and using horror to kind of explore that idea and lead it to places so the viewer can take out of it what they will, I guess. And in this case, I think that this film expertly conveyed that gentrification can be a good thing, but it can also be a terrible thing. As we see that Lupita's worries about her community are legitimate, and the people looking for money and a way out of the town found it through the wrong type of people. The people that come to these places take advantage of communities because they can't afford it, and then make them succumb to addiction and trying to gamble away all of their earnings just for a chance to win it big and get out, when in actuality, they're going to be stuck there forever. And in the case of Mr. Big, who's played by the iconic Richard Brake, like I've already mentioned, his character is played up very extremely, but I think that it's done in a way to kind of convey that this guy is insane, and he's willing to literally take everything away from people who have literally almost nothing to their name just to feel good inside and have some power. And if I haven't mentioned this, Mr. Big is a supernatural demon character, a la something like Billy Zane's character in Tales from the Crypt Presents Demon Knight. While I think Billy Zane's character is better in that movie, Richard Brake is the closest thing I have seen to that performance from Billy Zane. And I really enjoyed Mr. Big's character, and he brings a lot of ambiguity to what this movie is saying as well, because you can kind of understand that in our society, there's going to be people like him going into these real life communities trying to take advantage of people. And in the case of what happens to him in this movie, it feels almost comeuppance in nature, but it also feels like the people who stand up against this are vindicated and possibly in the right. Now, The movie never goes out of its way to over-explain things or paint people bad or whatever, and tries to forcefully feed you this stuff to make you feel uncomfortable or feel like you've just been smacked with a heavy hand with it all. It's very subtle, and it displays this stuff, like I said, in a way for the audience to pick up without feeling like they have to be talked down to about it. So, moving on from that, what I think that this movie also really excels in is painting beautiful visuals and gore violence. I have never seen anything outside of this from Gigi Saul Guerrero, and I'm highly convinced that she would make a great director or even writer for the Creepshow television series. I would warmly welcome her to come and try her hand at making Creepshow content for the franchise, because the use of lighting in this movie really reminds me pretty much to the T of how the Creepshow Shudder series would display a story and also how it would look on screen. And I think she's tremendously talented, and this movie makes me want to go check out more of her stuff. When it comes to, the story itself with Lupita and, her kind of getting a happy ending, I kind of like this as a shakeup as well, because often than not in these type of stories, the main characters normally don't get that happy ending. But here, while it does kind of take away from, I guess, the main message is trying to send at the same time within the ending about Lupita kind of changing her mind and her viewpoint about the bingo hall and gentrification in some mild ways, I do think that in the grand scheme, it leaves a lot of open-endedness to possibly continue the story with this same town, maybe with the same characters, but moving on to different types of people trying to come into the town or I guess wherever they end up next. So I guess we're to the point where I'm saying, why do I feel like this movie really belongs in Creepshow? If it's not the style that I've already talked about, if it's not the presentation of the story and the themes underwoven in it, and if it's not the gore and schlock, it's the vibe. This, to me, feels like this would be in a comic book. And perhaps at one point, this story could have been surmised to be in a horror anthology comic. I couldn't tell you. But it legit feels like you would find this in modern horror anthology comics or EC comics of the past. It's kind of remarkable in that regard. I think in terms of blending the schlock with the substance, this is more Creepshow or EC Comics in nature than some of the other series that you'll find out there. But if an artist put this pen to paper and released it as such, I don't think people would question it or question the validity of it whatsoever. When it comes down to my emotions of this story, I really do feel like this movie is criminally overlooked, especially within the schlock-loving community, or I guess the Creepshow community, in a nutshell. You see, I'm not just a Creepshow fan, I am a obsessed Creepshow fan. I'm constantly looking for more content because, as of now, we don't have a season 5 to really sink our teeth into with new official Creepshow content, so I'm looking elsewhere to kind of facilitate what I'm yearning for. And the matter of fact that I've only ever heard one person that is into this niche that I'm in bring this movie up baffles me. And maybe it's because it's a part of the Blumhouse straight-to-TV movie line that came out a few years ago, which, to my knowledge, was kind of mixedly recepted. And this movie, I commonly see put as the worst movie of the 8. And I'm going to be upfront and maybe talk about the reception of this movie. Coming from somebody who's actively looking for this type of stuff, I can kind of see why the general audience would turn on this movie. I've already brought up the fact that if you're not into the characters, you're not going to like this movie. I should also mention that if you're not into schlock and just horror comedy and over-the-topness, you're going to think that this movie is really dumb and stupid. And admittedly, it kind of is, but I also think that it's dumb and stupid to kind of bring levity to the situation of what the film is talking about with its themes. And to me, I think that's a perfect balance. And I'm going to be upfront. I know that I'm not the mainstream here. If this is the worst of these Blumhouse straight to Amazon movies, then I'm excited to check out the rest, because I thought that this movie was genuinely good for what it was going for. And while it's not the best executed thing ever, you know, it's serviceable. You know, we can get to the negatives, I guess. You know, there's hardly any plot in the movie. Things just happen to characters. It's kind of loose with the logic a little bit. There are some logic hurdles you kind of have to put disbelief at the door with to roll along with the story. How all this phenomenon starts with Mr. Big is very rushed, and it's never really explained what this green goo is, other than it's related to demonic activity that's conjuring this stuff to be manifested, I guess. And the demon's abilities, as we see with Mr. Big throughout the movie, is very ambiguous and kind of all over the place. And it seems kind of like a catch-all of, let's have random powers, which admittedly were some of my biggest negatives I had with the villains of the two Tales from the Crypt Presents movies, Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood. So it brought back some memories of watching those movies when it came to these negatives. And mainly, my biggest one that I haven't really talked about much is the fact that the pace of this movie, you have these slow moments that are building up characters, and then seemingly nothing is happening with side characters and venturing down them and underdeveloping them, moving away from Lupita. And then you have these moments where it's trying to make up for lost time, essentially, and go overboard and schlocky. But the way it's edited and what have you is kind of weird, and at some points it can be a little bit off-putting, and you can feel the tones of the film are kind of clashing in these moments. I feel like if this movie had like maybe a solid re-edit to it, or maybe an extended cut to kind of flesh out some things, this would have overall improved the product for a lot of people. Maybe with some tweaks, it could have helped the identity of the movie stick out a little bit better, and hopefully it wouldn't have gone too far in perhaps exploring the themes or anything, because I think that would have really ruined the movie if it got too explicit with it. So overall, what do I think about this movie? I think that this movie's a solid, good movie. There's nothing too special here, but there's nothing too harsh to hate on, really. I think that this movie has been given an unfair shake in the community. And give it about, maybe 5 to 10 years and people come back and remember this movie or maybe check it out for the first time. Who knows? This movie can develop a cult following at some point. How I would score it, though, given its flaws, I'd probably give this movie like a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. There's a lot of room for potential to score higher maybe in the future, but as of now, I think I'm being more than fair on this film at the score I'm giving it, which a 3.5 to me is a solid recommendable movie. If you haven't checked out this film, you need to go watch it at least once. If you don't like it, fine, but if you like it, go support it and possibly go buy it in your physical collection on the black market if you're looking to get it in your physical collection. So yeah, that's Bingo Hell. Let me know down in the comment section, what do you think about this movie? Do you like it? Do you not like it? And let me know other films that, in your opinion, feel like Creepshow out there that I can maybe talk about in future episodes. I'm always looking for more movies to check out anyway. Till next time, take care.